Hello, my name is Danny. I was an active Latter-day Saint for 60 years. In a recent video, I spoke about the true meaning of the temple. I compared and contrasted the biblical temple with modern LDS temples. Today, I want to talk about the Book of Mormon temples. Did they really exist? And if they did, what purpose did they have? But first, let's read a quote by a past LDS prophet that's extremely important concerning this matter. Former prophet and president of the LDS Church, Ezra Taft Benson, drew a line in the sand. Quote, "The Book of Mormon is the keystone of our testimony, just as the arch crumbles if the keystone is removed, so does all the church stand or fall with the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon." End quote. In other words, if the Book of Mormon is true, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is also true. But if the Book of Mormon is not true, then the LDS Church isn't true either. You see, it all hinges on that book. Now, we find in reading the Bible, when God commanded a temple to be built, there was always only one temple. Do you know why there was only one? Because it represented and symbolized the only true and living God. And that one and true living God only had one temple. That temple resided in Jerusalem and nowhere else. And so if that's the case, why then are there additional temples mentioned in the Book of Mormon narrative? Well, let's find out. After Lehi left Jerusalem approximately 600 BC in the Book of Mormon, Nephi built a large ship that sailed halfway around the world to the Americas. Upon arrival, the Book of Mormon tells us that Nephi became very industrious again, and in 2 Nephi chapter 5, verses 15 through 16, it says, quote, "And I did teach my people to build buildings, and to work in all manner of wood, and of iron, and of copper, and of brass, and of steel, and of gold, and of silver, and of precious ores, which were in great abundance. And I, Nephi, did build a temple, and I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things. For they were not to be found upon the land. Wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple. But the manner of the construction was like unto the temple of Solomon, and the workmanship thereof was exceedingly fine." End quote. Even Nephi wants to emphasize that it was exceedingly fine. Well, likewise, modern-day Latter-day Saint temples, 350 of them to be exact, and either already built, in construction, or in the planning stages, at the cost of $65 million each, totaling $23 billion, are also exceedingly fine, opulent, luxurious, and very expensive, of course. I wonder where Nephi got the knowledge and experience to construct buildings and to work in all manner of wood, iron, copper, brass, steel, gold, silver, and precious ores. Iron and steel were anachronistic items at that time in the Western Hemisphere. Besides, where did Nephi find the manpower to build a temple like Solomon's? Now, we can read in the Bible the specific dimensions of Solomon's temple given by God. It took around 150,000 men and 7 years to build Solomon's temple. In 1 Kings chapter 6 through chapter 9, it describes the construction and dedication of that temple. The Ark of the Covenant with the 10 Commandments was housed in Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, and animal sacrifice was the predominant mode of divine service in that temple. Solomon tells us in 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 6, quote, "But who is able to build him a temple, since heaven and the heaven of heavens cannot contain him? Who am I then that I should build him a temple except to burn sacrifice before him?" End quote. Everything that happened in Solomon's temple was public knowledge. Every ritual and ordinance is written and explained in great detail in the book of Exodus. Nothing was kept secret. But of course, it took only a couple of dozen Nephites at the most to build the temple with their same design as Solomon's temple, forged out of non-existent materials for that age. Interestingly, after you read this passage in 2 Nephi chapter 5, you find that Nephi never mentions that temple again. Never. His brother Jacob used this temple to preach a sermon, but after that we find no mention of any temple for hundreds of years in the Book of Mormon. Well, why is that? For the Jews in Israel, everything revolved around temple worship, but not for the Nephites in the Book of Mormon. In the Book of Mormon, the Nephites would eventually build 3 temples that are mentioned. This one in the land of Nephi, another in the land of Zarahemla, mentioned in Mosiah chapter 1, and one in the land of Bountiful in 3 Nephi chapter 1. And of course, there was no Ark of the Covenant in these temples, nor were there any animal sacrifices that were mentioned of being performed in these Nephite temples. It seems these temples were used solely for open assembly or a gathering place to hear from their leaders. Neither was there mention of a temple being used for sacred ordinances, like in the LDS temple, such as endowments, marriage sealings, second anointings, or ordinances for the dead like baptism. Of course, none of these ordinances were found in Solomon's temple either. And that later became a modern invention of Joseph Smith. Since there were no Levite priests among the Nephites, none of the Jewish ritual ceremonies nor ordinances of the Nephite temple as described in Leviticus could be performed. There was no annual Day of Atonement observed. So what was the purpose to build temples in the lands of the Book of Mormon in the first place? The author of the Book of Mormon, namely Joseph Smith, did not know how to make the connection. In Mosiah chapter 2, King Benjamin summoned all his people to the temple in Zarahemla to receive instruction and to receive a new name. I'm sure King Benjamin was referring to a single corporate name for his people. This new name, Benjamin's people would set themselves apart from other people in the land, and the new name was not Mormons. However, it does seem more than a coincidence that as a part of the modern LDS temple endowment ceremony, each temple attendee receives a new name, which they are told, quote, should always remember, and which they must keep sacred and never reveal except at a certain place, end quote. Well, that certain place is at the temple veil before the person enters into the celestial room, into the presence of God in the celestial room. Honestly, it both surprised me and disappointed me as an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to learn that on any given day of the year, the exact new name is given to every male and female, regardless of which temple it is around the world. You can see a list of these new names associated with the scheduled dates of going to the temple online at Temple Name Oracle. Go there and you can find your own endowment date, and then you'll find your new name. I'm convinced that the new name that I was given in the Idaho Falls Temple was not so special after all. Getting back to the temples in the Book of Mormon, I'm convinced those temples didn't really exist. There have been no archaeological buildings of, findings of buildings of that dating back to pre-Columbian times that match that grand construction. There was no Levitical priesthood among the fictional Nephites to perform Jewish ordinances in those temples anyway. So I'm going to conclude with another quote, this time from a living prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, who doubled down on the fact that he said, quote, everything in the church, everything, rises or falls on the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon and, by implication, the prophet Joseph Smith's account of how it came forth. It sounds like a sudden death proposition to me, Elder Holland said. Either the Book of Mormon is what the prophet Joseph said it is, or the church and its founder are false, fraudulent, and a deception from the first instance onward, end quote. I couldn't agree with Jeffrey more, and I'm convinced that the weight of evidence is not in favor of either Joseph Smith or the LDS Church. Anyway, something to consider. And thanks for watching. Check out more videos like this on YouTube or at my website, talkingtomormons.com. Please share with family and members. And until next time, God bless.